What's up guys, it's TheJarvitar, and today we're talking buffs. We're talking about those Pokemon that have been left behind by power creep over the years and desperately need some love nowadays from Game Freak. It's not surprising that over years of development time, and now that 9 generations of Pokemon have come and gone, that a lot of older Pokemon are not as strong as the ones that are introduced today. This definitely isn't the rule. There are plenty of Pokemon that are still goated, despite the changing roster of Pokemon that's constantly evolving around them. Gyarados is a great example of this. Gyarados is pretty much always going to be pretty viable and strong. Same with the mascot of this channel, Tyranitar. Over 20 years of Pokemon have come and gone and Tyranitar is still busted as hell. But these guys are pretty unique in that quite a few Pokemon have been tossed to the wayside and stronger Pokemon come out every year. And personally, I think it was around Gen 6 that new Pokemon introduced really started creeping beyond that which had come before. They were more specialized with better base stat totals, abilities, unique moves, and a whole lot of other things that keep each individual Pokemon introduced viable in the current meta in some form or some niche. So that's where this video came in. My plan is to dig up 3 or so Pokemon that have been essentially made irrelevant by recent games. We'll go over some of the main reasons that they've fallen out of use, and then I think it would be a good idea to discuss what changes I would make in order to bring that Pokemon into a place where it can really shine again. This could be made with changes to base stat totals, new ability, a new type, or all of the above. For this video, I'm going to focus exclusively on Gen 1 Pokemon, and later down the line, I'll find 3 or more Pokemon from each generation and go over what I think could be done to help them out. So with that all understood, I feel like it's time to kick it off. The Pokemon that inspired this whole video idea is one that is very near and dear to my heart, Nidoking. A while back, I found this art of red with a Nidoking. In it, Nidoking looks hard as f***. He's like every edgelord's dream. This image of Nidoking holds true throughout so many of his depictions. His sprite in red, blue, and yellow, fire red, and leaf green, they're all raw. Like, this dude's spiky. Look at my boy now. Look at how they've massacred my boy. How could anyone in their right mind justify this? But it's not all in the model. He's also straight up booty cheeks nowadays. And that's not even the most depressing part, because here's the thing. Nidoking has been buffed before. Starting in X and Y, Nidoking's base attack was raised by 10 points to be 102 from 92, which is where it's been since Gen 2. Why they felt the need to make such an insignificant change is beyond me. Like, if you're gonna rework a Pokemon, do something meaningful. You know what I mean? So as you can see, making Nidoking relevant again has been on the minds of the devs for a while now. But a small buff of 10 points has done essentially nothing for this Pokemon. Nidoking needs some extra attention. And while we're addressing his needs, I think we can throw Nidoqueen into the mix as well. Nidoking and Nidoqueen prior to Gen 6 had identical base stat totals, but with different distributions. Nidoking was meant to be a faster offensive attacker, and Nidoqueen a bulkier tank. The differences are minimal, amounting to really just a slight difference in stat allocation, so there definitely is room to improve here. As far as their types, I don't think that should change at all. Ground Poison was unique to just Nidoking and Nidoqueen up until Scarlet and Violet introduced Paldean, Wooper, and Clodsire. With that typing being essentially unique, there's no way that I could adjust that, especially now that the poison type is more useful now than it's ever been because of fairies. Now, one of the things that the Nidos are very famous for is their vast move pool. An overwhelming majority of TMs are on the table for these Pokemon. Like we're talking Surf, Flamethrower, everything in between. So let's look at abilities. As of their most recent appearances in Sword and Shield's Crown Tundra DLC, the Nidos had Poison Point and Rivalry for their main abilities, and Sheer Force as their hidden ability. Now that we've got a good idea of where they're at right now, let's adjust them and see what we can do. As far as stat spread is concerned, I think that we need to take the idea that these Mons fit very separate offensive and defensive niches, and we need to run with that. We don't kick around the idea casually, we gotta commit. At the moment, Nidoking's stats look like this, but I say that we commit to Nidoking being a physical attacker so that we can have some more points to redistribute. On top of that, I say we give both of them another 10-point buff just to have a little bit more to work with. In this scenario, Nidoking's stat line changes to this, highlighting his commitment to hitting hard with physical moves. Nidoqueen, on the other hand, will get the same treatment, but instead we'll take those points and shore up her defenses even further. Now let's circle back to abilities. Here's what I'm thinking. I say that upon evolving to their final forms, Nidoking should drop Poison Point for sheer force as the main ability, with something like Moxie for a new hidden ability. Nidoqueen's abilities should now highlight her newly expanded role as a defensive tank. She should keep Poison Point because it incentivizes her to take hits, but as a hidden ability, I think that Stamina would be perfect. And with those slight adjustments, I can't help but feel like the Nidos will now be able to actually perform in the game of today. That is assuming that they're ever let out of Pokemon home jail. Moving on to another Pokemon that desperately needs some love, I think we should talk about one of the most important groups of Pokemon that there is, the Evolutions. This iconic group is extremely important to a wide amount of fans of the franchise. Everyone has their favorite Evolution. Mine is Espeon, for example. But not all of them are necessarily equal. Some are significantly stronger than the others. Like Sylveon is obviously busted, and Vaporeon is, well, we don't talk about Vaporeon. The evolution that I feel desperately needs a buff is the Fire-type Flareon. Let me clue you into why. First off, let's take a look at the stat line here. Okay, are you seeing what I'm seeing? All in all, we have a pretty wild stat line here. 130 base attack is frankly ridiculous. I'm sure a good chunk of you didn't know that Flareon hit that hard. That's attack nearly on par with Tyranitar. But the speed is pretty bad. Base 65 isn't necessarily running circles around just about anybody. But the bulk is pretty solid here. So what, may you ask, is the problem here? Flareon is plenty good. Well, let me ask you this. How many physical stab moves do you think Flareon has access to in Scarlet and Violet? The answer is 4. Flame Charge, with only base 50 power. Fire Fang, with base 65 power and not 100% accuracy. Temper Flare, with 75 base power, with the chance to double if your last move failed, which is, I guess, fairly niche. And Flare Blitz, base 120, but you're hitting recoil every time. So that's what's really missing here, is a solid stab option that Flareon can use to hit harder, because all of its moves are pretty terrible. So what is it that's missing here? A single stab option to make use of Flareon's incredible physical attack. Like, were it a special attacker, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There isn't really a physical equivalent to Flamethrower. And because of that, we're left with a slightly specialized Pokemon that has no idea what to do. On top of that, Flareon's coverage options are essentially non-existent. It's pretty brutal all around. So what can be done to address this problem with Flareon? Well, I have 2 ideas. And the first is way less radical than the second. In the first one, it's pretty simple. We change Flareon's move pool. We make a 90 base damage physical fire move without the negatives of a Flare Blitz, and then we let the little dude run wild with it. Call the move Flare Strike or something generic like that. And we should also make sure to give Flareon an adequate number of coverage options to support its stats. Now here's the second option, and keep in mind that these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. In fact, the 2 of these would need to happen together. But think about this. Sylveon is far and away the best evolution in battle, in my opinion, and that can be attributed to 3 major things. First, it has a solid move pool, and second, it has the best offensive typing in the game. But third is the most impactful. It's the ability Pixelate. Pixelate takes all of your normal type attacks, adds a 20% damage boost, and then makes them fairy type. So Return, Hyper Voice, Hyper Beam, they're all hitting with stab now. And there are a few of these types of abilities that have this kind of effect. Pixelate is one, and Refrigerate is another, meant to affect ice types. Having this ability makes Sylveon infinitely more intimidating on the field. So what if we gave Flareon this same kind of ability, but for fire types, like Flariate maybe? That would mean that the stab problem is essentially fixed, because Flareon would now be hitting stab fire type return. And pair that with all the coverage options that we could throw at it, and Flareon is looking like a force to be reckoned with. Alright, now the next Pokemon. We gotta crank through these bad boys if I'm gonna have any time to edit this later. But before we do, I gotta check in, make sure that we're having a good time. If talking about Pokemon is something that you're a fan of, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Now, the last 2 Pokemon I just talked about, I feel have been overshadowed in recent memory by more recent releases of the Pokemon games, but this last guy I want to talk about, I feel, was made irrelevant essentially upon release, way back in 1996 with the games coming out. Now, the trait evolutions in Gen 1 are a specifically elite group. Alakazam, Gengar, and Machamp are some of the strongest Pokemon that can be found in a playthrough. But one of them is not like the other. Golem. Despite how cool it is, it was immediately outclassed by the 3 that I mentioned earlier. Now, why might this be? Well, first off, let's look at the stats. The 4 of these Pokemon, despite having a thematic link, aren't all equal in terms of base stat totals. Machamp leads the group with a base stat total of 505, and then Gengar and Alakazam have an even 500. Golem is actually just worse mathematically by virtue of having a base stat total of 495. Is it a lot? No, but the fact that there is a difference is pretty significant. The next weakness to be found is in Golem's dual typing. So many rock types in Gen 1 were nerfed by the fact that they were given the extra dual typing of rock ground. Doing so made their naturally great defenses essentially pointless, because all of them could get wrecked by a single water gun or vine whip. So is Golem naturally really bulky? Yeah, it is, but its typing invalidates so much of what makes it valuable in that sense. His move pool is solid though. Good coverage and of course good stab, earthquake, and stone edge. Its abilities are pretty good too. Sturdy is always going to be a great ability to have for utility purposes. No one likes getting one shot, especially if you've got 2 major 4x weaknesses. And Rockhead makes it so you don't take any recoil damage from moves like Double Edge. So that's essentially what Golem has to offer. But there's a certainly pretty significant aspect of all this that we haven't addressed. Alolan Golem. In Sun and Moon, we received the addition of Golem's Alolan variant, giving it the electric rock typing, a cheap beard and mustache disguise, and I guess a railgun. Alolan Golem's stat spread is exactly the same as its base form, which I felt was an interesting choice. But the biggest and most significant change was Alolan Golem's hidden ability, Galvanize, which acts like Sylveon's Pixelate but with the electric type. So here's what I'm thinking. There's not a whole lot that I think we need to do to Golem. I don't want to change its typing, which means that we'll be maintaining its 2 4x weaknesses to both grass and water. So I think Golem right now is a high risk, little reward type Pokemon. So we need to make it worthwhile to run. And I think that the best way to do that is to give it some pretty crazy offensive options. First off, we'll give it 10 more points to its base stats, on par with Machamp. We'll move that to its special defense to help stop the bleeding a bit. And then we'll take 20 points from its useless special attack and then move that to its special defense. Doing those 2 things together will bring it from 65 to 95, which could end up going a long way. Now, most of the changes that I am going to make are going to compound directly off of its utility of Rockhead. So first and foremost, we've got to make sure that Golem has Head Smash. It blows my mind that it doesn't. Alongside that, we're going to do what we did with Flareon and make it a new ability. It'll be a version of Galvanize from its Alolan form that affects ground types. Doing that will make it equal to its Alolan variant. And so now Golem is a bit bulkier and it has the capacity to hit stab 120 base power Head Smash with no recoil. Let me double check that that is the case, that Head Smash has 120 Smash SV. Oh, geez, that's 150? Whoa, okay, jeez. So now Golem is a bit bulkier, and it has the capacity to hit stab 150 base power Head Smash with no recoil. It can hit Double Edge 120 base power with a ground typing and a 20% damage boost on top of that. That'll for sure make up for those 2 4x weaknesses. Do you think that I went overboard with Golem? Maybe, but I might just be a little bit butthurt that such a cool Pokemon has been essentially useless the entire time that it's been around. Now, with all that in mind, let's wrap up this Kanto part of this discussion. At some point soon, I'll make sure to find some Johto Pokemon that also need some love. Pokemon is very near and dear to my heart, so finding ways to bring some of my old favorites into the spotlight will always excite me. And if there's some more Kanto Pokemon that you wanted to see get some love, let me know what they were and how you would do it down in the comment section. And if you have any suggestions for Pokemon from other generations that need this treatment as well, head on down to the comment section for that too. In fact, if there's anything you'd like discussed, throw it on down there. And make sure to like this video if it was something that scratched that type of itch for you, and absolutely demolish the soul out of that subscribe button if you're trying to catch some new videos. And lastly, if you're a fan of Pokemon, and especially the Pokemon trading card game, also make sure to go follow my brother Jarchomp Collectibles and subscribe to his channel there. And with that, peace out, Pokemon trainers. Alolan Golem oh gosh, that's so hard to say. Wow. Alolan Golem